This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. The Prime Minister has set out a new timetable for three of the most important votes in the entire Brexit process, if they all happen, of course. Theresa May has promised a meaningful vote on her Brexit deal by March the 12th, and it could come a bit earlier. If MPs reject her plan then, they will then vote again the following day on whether they want to rule out no deal. And if that vote passes, the next day they will vote on whether to extend Article 50. So what are the prospects of Brexit? Joining me to talk about this are Christine Jardine from the Liberal Democrats, Drew Hendry from the SNP, the Conservative MP Gillian Keegan and Labour's Ben Bradshaw. Welcome to you all. Just before we start, Chris Williamson saying Labour's been too apologetic about anti-Semitism. What do you make of that?
I think anti-Semitism has been a huge problem and is a huge problem, and I'm worried about the extent to which people in my constituency are beginning to say that they feel no longer welcome, and I think that's a very sad situation, and there's no such thing as being too hard on anti-Semitism.
Well, I think it's a disastrous thing to happen. At this time, the Labour Party have shown that they've allowed this to get out of control, this issue. They should have clamped down on this right away and said it was absolutely unacceptable to have any form of anti-Semitism coming through. There is no such thing as apologising too much for having made such an outrageous mess of dealing with this issue, and they need to get it sorted once and for all.
It's not all the Labour Party, though, is it? I mean, there are many Jewish people who've been important members of the Labour Party.
Yes, and I mean, it's incredible what's happened to the Labour Party. I feel very sad about that, but it's absolutely clear that politicians give permission to other people if they start to be apologetic for this kind of behaviour. You have to show leadership when you're in the public eye, and you have to say this is absolutely wrong. We absolutely will not tolerate anti-Semitism at all. Anything less is not good enough, because you have to show a position of leadership, because you give permission to other people to show their bias or their bigotry.
And John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn, Tom Watson, they've all talked about this. Is the Labour leadership getting on top of this sufficiently?
No, I can't understand why Chris Williamson has not been suspended by the Labour Party. He seems to be deliberately trying to undermine Jeremy and the party's attempts to deal effectively with anti-Semitism. The party's appointed Charlie Faulkner, Lord Faulkner, to deal with these problems. We had John Landsman, the head of Momentum, this week saying openly that we had a major problem with anti-Semitism that hadn't been addressed. Hundreds of outstanding policy complaints he referred to, and yet Chris Williamson goes to a Momentum meeting in Sheffield and tries to play down the problem, say it's all been got up to have a go at Jeremy. We cannot tolerate this any longer, and if we don't deal with it, we'll never be in government.
OK, well, let's move on now to Brexit, and we've got a lot of options yesterday. Christine Jardine from the Prime Minister. How's the Liberal Democrats going to navigate their way through those various choices?
Well, I think we recognise and we appreciate the fact that the Prime Minister has recognised that there is a problem now, and that she has gone some way to saying that she will take no deal off the table. But it's becoming increasingly clear that not only is there no majority for no deal, there's no majority for her deal, that what she needs to find, if she genuinely wants to deliver her deal, is a way of getting it through the Commons, and the way of doing that would be to say, I will put it back to the public. And then she would have the people who want her deal and the people who want it to go back to the public. And she could find some consensus in the way ahead. And that's what we've always said. It's what the people's vote say. And, you know, hopefully there will be amendment in the next few days. We've actually put a name to an amendment with the independent group, which paves the way for a people's vote.
But wouldn't that be collectively Parliament saying we're not up to the job?
Well, Parliament should be taking back control of this situation. Theresa May's proved that she can't be trusted in this issue. This is just yet another attempt to wind...
It's not taking back control to kick it back to the people,
for example, Parliament could join the SNP in voting for their amendment today if it's selected, which rules out a no-deal Brexit right away. And that's something that Parliament could do. The idea that this is being pushed further down the line to create a situation where there's a panic amongst those people that prefer Brexit, and they'll suddenly support this dreadful deal by Theresa May, or indeed, force through some kind of no-deal scenario is just unacceptable. Parliament has the opportunity to rule out a no-deal Brexit, has the opportunity to extend Article 50 and to put this back to the public with
So
a vote
you
to
think it
remain as
has
an
to go
option.
back to the public?
Well, at the moment, it doesn't seem that there's any other way out of this this situation just now. What is on the table from Theresa May is a terrible deal or a no-deal situation, and that's not acceptable. It's going to cause huge economic harm, especially in Scotland, as new UK government figures showed last night. We're likely to be worst hit by a no-deal Brexit. And Scotland voted overwhelming to remain. It's not something that we can countenance.
Ben Bradshaw, I mean, do you think that's where we're heading, to Parliament voting for another referendum?
I hope so. Theresa May has told Parliament 108 times that we will leave the European Union on March the 29th. I think yesterday she bowed to the inevitable. That's not going to happen. I mean, it's impossible. Even if she gets her deal, we can't get all the legislation through in time. And I just wish this Prime Minister sometimes would face up to reality and do what's in the national interest and not desperately struggle to try to hold her party together. But I think, yes, and that's certainly the desirable outcome. I don't think there's going to be any other way out that will settle this except to ask the public to ratify whatever deal we eventually end up with.
What do you think? Is that where we're
Well,
going?
I completely disagree with that. So I think one thing we all have in common is I think we all voted to remain in the referendum, but I have crossed to actually, well, they say the dark side, but actually to me it is respecting the vote and what people voted for. And I think we in Parliament have to not lose sight of that. It's very important. It was a referendum like no other. We did get a result that we probably were not expecting, but the reality is that was the answer. And therefore, I believe we have to we have to leave the European Union. Now,
given all the evidence that many people point to that it wouldn't be to the advantage of the country or your constituents.
Actually, I don't think there's no evidence about the future. So there's two things I've heard here. One is the description of Theresa May's deal or the deal as a bad deal. That is used by people who want to remain. They say it's a bad deal, it's a bad deal. Actually, it is not a bad deal. I've read the deal in great detail, and I have worked in business for a long time. I look at it, and when I read the deal, I thought, actually, that is a fair, reasonable compromise to reverse our way in a cooperative way out of the European Union. And I think the deal is fine. And actually, the ERG and people in our party, there was something this morning, they have to take yes for an answer.
If you think the deal's so good and it's so fine and people will like
well,
it,
it's a
and business will
compromise,
like
bearing
it,
in mind.
why won't you take it back to the people? Why won't you give them the chance to say yes, it
Because
is what
they've
they want?
already had a vote. And if you get a different answer, or even if you get, if you get the same answer, maybe it's less of a problem. But if you get a different answer, I think there'll be division in our country for a long time. Already, this has been the most divisive thing that's happened to our country. And I believe what we need to do, we shouldn't abdicate our duty. We are politicians. We are put there to sort out difficult problems. It is a very complex situation.
But
expecting
it can't be our duty
people
to promote economic disadvantage.
It is
Every single
economic
bit,
disadvantage.
every single analysis from the UK government itself shows that there is no good Brexit from every version down to Theresa May's deal down to no deal.
What's in common with all those analyses?
It's going to be catastrophic for jobs
they
and
haven't
the economy.
analysed the status quo. What they've done, if you do any modelling, you would model what could happen in this scenario, what could happen in Europe. They've kept Europe as a status quo. So it's not an economic analysis.
That's fairy tale economics.
No.
Every single piece of analysis from the UK government itself and everyone else who's analysed this shows an economic disadvantage.
It doesn't show scenarios of what could happen in Europe.
So let's be clear about this.
It doesn't show scenarios of what could happen in Europe.
If we leave the European Union, you think economically there won't even be a hiccup or a transition?
I think our economic path will be our economic path, and there's many, many factors that are involved in that, not just our relationship with Europe. We obviously have to keep a close...
Brexit.
No, we have to keep a close relationship with Europe, but if you look at the political declaration and the deal, it actually keeps very close collaboration. That deal, I think, will be economically fine.
Ben Bradshaw, wouldn't it be preferable to adopt this deal than to have a no-deal Brexit?
Well, certainly than a no-deal Brexit, but let's explode the major myth about this deal, which is if it goes through, it will end the uncertainty. It won't. That's when the uncertainty actually begins. There's nothing about our future relationship that's agreed. We'll be outside the European Union without any negotiating power or clout whatsoever, and that's, for me, one of the worst main reasons it's a really bad deal.
Now, you muttered that you weren't surprised by the outcome of the referendum. Do you think that it would be any different if there was another referendum?
I do. I think there has been a shift in public opinion. We've had a lot of young people coming onto the electoral roll who are worried about their future. And I think as the reality of Brexit has become clearer to people, and as people look at the government's deal, I mean, what does it get? 20% support in the country? It's not liked, even by many people who voted leave. So I can't understand this argument that it's undemocratic to give this decision back
to them. Do you think
to
it'd be any better? I mean,
I think it would be completely different, because there have been more than 120 opinion polls in the last year, I think, and more than 100 of them have shown Remain now to be ahead, because over the 2.5 years we have had the debate, which we should actually have had before the first referendum. People are seeing clearly now what the economic impact will be, and they don't like it, and they want a chance, they deserve a chance to say, actually, no, this is not what you told us. I have to say, we've spoken
to many people on Sky News who say, look, I voted to leave, I want to leave. I don't understand why politicians are not doing what the majority wants.
Well, if there's another referendum, they will have the chance to vote leave again. And if the majority still want to go ahead, then the deal should become law. I have no problem with, once the deal is on the table and people see it, if there's another referendum and people vote again to leave, that is completely different from voting on a principle and then 2.5 years later, being 2.5 years down the line and finding out that it's not what you were told it would be, and that the economic picture is pretty bleak.
Of course, in Scotland, the whole issue of holding referendums several times relates to independence as well. I mean, Scotland voted to Remain last time round. Could it get a bigger vote for Remain this time round?
Well, we were promised in 2014 that the voting no to independence was our way of staying in the European Union, and of course that's been betrayed now as a lie. What we had in 2016 is Scotland voting overwhelmingly to Remain, and since then Scotland's been ignored at every single stage by this Tory government and at Westminster. I think the opinion polls are showing now in Scotland that the vote to Remain would actually be much higher than it was in 2016.
Do you think there could be a majority in Parliament to bring about another referendum?
Listening to this panel, you would think yes. I think not. But I think if we don't get a deal, it does leave the really open question, and we extend Article 50 or whatever happens in those subsequent votes, which is, what do we do? You can't just stay in no man's land. You have to either leave with a deal or, you know, do something different. But I personally think we have to leave with a deal.
Yeah, I appreciate that you think it's the right thing to do to leave with a deal. But if it came about that there was another referendum, what side would you be on?
Well, that's difficult. I honestly think it is difficult, because even though I did vote and campaign to Remain, I honestly think when you put something like this to the people once... I mean, referendums are generally a bad idea, but when you do, if you don't listen to the answer, I think it's absolutely awful for politicians to not take on board what happened last time and implement that. And then, you know, they voted for Article 50. I wasn't there at the time. I'm sure I would have done if I was there. Article 50 sets this to be a negotiation where all the risk goes to the leaving country. But if there is
if Parliament does bring about another referendum, I mean, where people stand is going to be crucial, isn't it?
And I think it's very difficult because, yes, I mean, where would you stand when you know, the people have already voted? I don't know, actually. I think it's really difficult because half of me wants to respect the referendum. And, you know, clearly what...
Surely our job as MPs
doesn't stand still at one point in time. That's the whole point. You know, you've done your best.
There's no yes or no to this. There's no black or white. You're making out as though it's a disaster or it's great.
We have to
it's more subtle.
We think is best
it's more subtle than that.
Thank you all. We shall see. We're going now live to Delhi in India,